Have you ever thought about how important it is for every vote to count? Well, it all starts with making sure that the voter information is accurate. That's what we're talking about today.
That's right.
So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Indonesian election regulations, specifically on how they continuously update voter data.
Absolutely. And we're going to be looking at Regulation Number 1 of 2025 from the General Election Commission of Indonesia.
Oh, the KPU.
That's right, the KPU. And our mission for this deep dive is to understand exactly how Indonesia keeps its voter rolls comprehensive and accurate and basically ready for any upcoming election.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Ready for any upcoming election. And this regulation that we're looking at is built on 10 core principles that guide the whole process of keeping the voter data up to date.
Yeah.
They aim for the voter data to be comprehensive, inclusive, accurate, up-to-date, open, responsive, participatory, accountable, protective of personal data, and accessible.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. When you look at that list, is there anything that kind of jumps out at you as particularly noteworthy?
I think the fact that it needs to be participatory is really interesting.
Right.
And what that means is that Indonesian citizens can actually propose updates to voter data. So it's not just all top down, it's also bottom up. And that's something that I think is really important for ensuring that the data is as accurate as possible, because it's really tapping into that local knowledge. You know, the people who are actually living in these communities, they know who's who and who's moved and who's, you know, who should be on the voter rolls and who shouldn't. And then, of course, the other one that really stands out to me is the protection of personal data. I mean, that's just non-negotiable in our world today.
Right.
You know, we have to make sure that people's privacy is being protected throughout this entire process.
Absolutely. So we talked about the principles. Now let's get into who exactly is included in this continuous voter data update, or PDPB, in Indonesia.
Okay, so Article 4 of the regulation clarifies that. It basically covers Indonesian citizens who are residing in the country and overseas who are at least 17 years old. Or they have been married. So that's interesting, even if they're not currently married, if they've been married at some point.
Got it.
They're included in this. The main people who are excluded are people who have had their political rights revoked by a court, and then also active military or police personnel.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What happens with Indonesian citizens who have maybe relocated to a different country?
So they are actually recorded at their last known address within Indonesia.
Got it.
Which makes sense because they're still tied to their, you know, voting district back in Indonesia.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So this sounds like a really massive undertaking. Which organizations are responsible for making sure that this is all happening?
Yeah, so Article 5 points to the KPU,
right,
which we talked about earlier. But it's actually the KPU at 3 different levels. So the national level, the provincial level, and then the district or city level.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like a, you know, top-down approach.
Yeah. They're all working together.
Yeah.
Okay, could you break down what each of those levels is responsible for?
Sure. So you can think of the national KPU as like setting the policy.
Okay.
They're the ones who are coming up with the overall plan for how this voter data is going to be updated.
Got it.
And they're also the ones who are consolidating all of that data from across the country.
Okay.
Then you have the provincial KPU, who is basically coordinating and supervising everything that's happening within their specific province.
Makes sense.
And then finally, you have the district or city KPU, who is really the one who's doing, you know, the boots on the ground work.
Right.
They're the ones who are actually going out and collecting the data and updating the voter lists.
So they're really like the front line.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So focusing on that local level now, how often are those updates happening?
So Article 9 specifies that the district and city KPUs have to update their voter data at least once every 3 months.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a continuous cycle. It's constant. Okay. Where is all of the information that they're using for these updates coming from? Like, what are the sources?
So Article 10 gets into that, and they use a variety of sources. So they use the voter list from the most recent election. They use national population data, which is actually updated every 6 months.
Wow.
They use data from other relevant government agencies. And then, really importantly, they use those public reports that we talked about earlier where citizens can propose changes.
Right. So they're really taking all of those different sources into account.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's cool. What kind of information are they actually tracking during these updates?
So Article 11 lists out kind of the essential data points that they're looking at. It includes things like the person's NIK, which is their national identification number.
Okay.
Their family card number, so that's the KK number, their full name, obviously.
Of course.
Their birth date and place, their gender, marital status, current address if they have any disabilities.
Oh, wow.
And then other relevant details. So it's a pretty comprehensive profile of each voter.
Yeah, it sounds very thorough. And I think it's really noteworthy that they are noting disability status.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a really important step towards making sure that the elections are accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
So what are the key actions that the local KPU is taking with all of this data?
So according to Article 14, they are processing the data by checking it for accuracy. They're mapping it geographically, which I think is really interesting to kind of see where everybody is located.
Right.
And then they're also doing a lot of coordination with other local bodies. So, for example, they're coordinating with the Bawaslu, which is the election oversight agency.
Got it.
They're coordinating with civil registry offices, correctional facilities, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Law enforcement, local government. So a lot of different stakeholders involved.
Wow. So it's a very collaborative process.
Yeah, for sure. And then after all of that coordination, they're actually updating those voter lists. And so they're looking for people who might no longer be eligible to vote. And then they're also looking for people who have newly become eligible to vote.
Okay. What are some of the common reasons why someone might no longer be eligible to vote?
So Article 17 lists out quite a few different reasons. It could be that they've passed away.
Oh, of course.
It could be that they're registered in multiple places. It could be that they're under 17 and not married.
Okay.
They've moved outside of the electoral district. They've become active military or police. They're a foreign citizen, or they've had their political rights revoked.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. A pretty thorough list. And on the flip side, who might be added to the voter rolls?
So that could include people who have turned 17, people who have transitioned out of active military or police service, former inmates whose voting rights have been restored, people who have moved into the area.
Right.
But it's important to note that all of those additions have to be supported by documentation. So they can't just add people willy-nilly.
Of course, of course. So it sounds like transparency is a really big component of this whole process, especially with all of that local coordination that's going on. Is there a way for the public to actually see these updated voter lists?
Yeah, absolutely. So Article 19 mandates that the District CKPU has to hold open plenary meetings at least every 3 months to present those updated voter lists.
Yep.
And this is an opportunity for the public to come in and review the information and raise any concerns or point out any discrepancies that they might find.
So really a chance for the public to be involved in the process.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. And does this same type of updating and review happen at the national level as well?
Yeah, so Article 34 confirms that the national KPU is also doing voter data updates every 6 months.
Okay.
And they're using the data that they've received from the provinces and from overseas to do that. And they also hold open plenary meetings for review.
Okay, so it's kind of like that top-down approach again. It's happening at all levels.
That's great. So we've talked about the continuous process. We've talked about all the different levels that are involved. It seems like there must be a lot of specific forms and reporting mechanisms in place to manage all of this data.
Yeah, there are. So the regulations refer to several key forms, like, for example, the Model A Davdar Pemili PDPB, which is used for the initial voter list.
Okay.
There's Model A Davdar Perubahan Pemili PDPB, which is used for recording changes.
Okay.
Model A Recap Kabko PDPB for like district and city summaries. And then Model A Tanggapan Masyarakat PDPB, which is actually used for capturing public feedback.
Oh, wow.
So all of these forms are really ensuring that there's a systematic approach to data management and reporting.
Right, and it's all standardized.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So we've learned a lot about this Indonesian regulation today. When we kind of put it all together, what would you say is the main takeaway about how Indonesia keeps its voter data up to date?
I think the main message here is that Indonesia has a really robust system in place for voter data maintenance.
Yep. And it's not just a one-time thing. This is an ongoing effort.
Right.
And it involves all levels of government. So national, provincial, and local election authorities. They're all working together. They're working with other agencies.
It's very collaborative.
Yeah. And they're also, really importantly, making sure that citizens have a way to participate in the process. And all of things is guided by a clear set of principles that are aimed at achieving accurate and inclusive voter registration.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing. to make sure that everyone who's eligible is able to vote.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really interesting that they're coordinating with those correctional facilities that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that really highlights their commitment to making sure that everybody has a voice.
Yeah, it shows that they're not forgetting about any segment of society.
Right. So thinking about how massive of an undertaking this is, and, it's happening all the time, it's constantly being updated, it really kind of prompts a question for me. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges in actually maintaining a truly accurate national voter registry in a country that's as diverse and dynamic as Indonesia?
That's a really good question.
And I think also, what role could technology play in addressing those challenges in the future?
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
It is.
So thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. It's been really insightful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.